I'm going to do something that you can't do, which is take off your mask for a little bit. All right. So this is a wonderful moment. If you have a cell phone, it's a great moment to make sure it's on either off or totally on vibrate before we start the service. I know that we have many people who are joining us in a world that of Zoom. You know, people can dial in from Atlanta and all over the world, where Sally touched so many people's lives in doing that. Maureen, if you can't see me, you can move a chair over right over. I don't have to stretch my. It's so good to see so many of longtime friends and beloved community members and family as we say shalom, as we say goodbye to a full and rich life. 1929 to now is a long and full and blessed life, and a colorful life. And we're going to get to tell some wonderful stories and recall some wonderful moments. Before we start today's service, I do need to pause for a second. Sally loved the community, and we're all in our community. When Sally was, in the Denver community, when your folks were in the Denver community, there was Denver, and there was a little place called Boulder, which was often Never Never Land, but places like Louisville and everything else didn't exist. And we just need to pause for a moment and think about all the people who lost their homes and lost everything they've known. We've been very thankful that it's not been really a loss. I think there was one loss of life, but as of date, mostly property. And imagine going away and coming home and everything you've known is gone. So we have to be thankful for what we have and our blessings for all, and not only that, for the response of our community, from healthcare institutions and first responders, firefighters, that people herself and Red Cross and community organizations are stepping up. So just always be aware and be safe, and always have a good go bag to go, because you never know when your moments can be in that period of time. I read from the book of Isaiah. The prophet said, Kol makra v'makra, Kol basir chatzitz v'chol hasto. Kitzitz hazeh yavesh asir nav ruach. Echin hatzir yavesh asir naval tzitz. U'devar alhenu yakum le'olam. A voice says, cry out, and I say, what shall I cry? All flesh is grass, all its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades when the wind of the Lord blows upon it. Surely people of grass, the grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God shall endure forever. On a day like today, we look out into the mountains and we think about what the psalmist saw, the beauty and the power of God's presence, and even in the midst of destruction, and even this afternoon and potentially a very big storm, one can be not religious and spiritually moved by the power of the mountains. And I know that when I drive around Denver in any day and I look out, and it impacts me. And so the psalmist first said in Hebrew, "Esai enai ele hari me'an yavo esri, esri me'im Adonai osa shema ba'aretz, ayatin lamut reglecha al yanum shomrecha, hine lu'linan v'lashan shemer Yisrael, anat shmercha anitzilcha nimicha, yamem hashemesh lo yakeka v'ruach balala, v'nai yishmor mikoraj shmor nafshecha, tzecha voacha me'v'tala olam." I lift up my eyes to the hills, I lift up my eyes to the mountains, and where does my help come? My help comes from God, who has made the beauty of the heaven and the earth, from God who has created all that we see. God does not let your foot be moved. God who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, God who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. God is your keeper. God is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not smote you by day, nor the moon by night. God will keep you from all evil. God will keep you from your going out and your coming in, from this time forth and forevermore. Who shall ascend the mountain of the Lord? This woman that has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not taken God's name in vain most days. She that works not deceitfully, she that walks uprightly and speaks truth in her heart, that has no slander upon her tongue, nor does evil to her fellow, nor takes up reproach against her neighbor. Happy is this woman that greatly delights in God's commandments. Unto the upright she shines as a light in darkness, gracious, full of compassion, and full of righteousness. When I was thinking about Sally and what liturgy I wanted to select and what poets and writers, there is a Israeli poet by the name of Zelda, and she has this beautiful Hebrew poem, and it talks about the power of naming. The first part of it reads, Shenatan lo Elohim, v'natnu lo avi v'imo, l'chol ish yeshem, shenatan lo kemuato. Every one of us has a name. We each have a name given to us by God, and a name given to us by our mother and by our father. We each have a name given by our stature and given by our smile and given by our attire. We each have a name given by the hills and given by the walls. We each have a name given by the stars and given by our friends. We each have a name given by our sins and given by our yearnings. We each have a name given by our enemies and given by love. We each have a name given by our celebrations and given by our work. We each have a name given by the seasons and given by our blindness. We each have a name given by the sea and now given by our death. And so there are many names that we have for Sally, and there's going to be some wonderful reflections. And I just want to start before with these words from Dylan and Bruce and then Shelley to frame our comments. So how do you begin to eulogize Sally? Of course, it has to be done with a story, as Sally loved to tell stories. Sally loved to write stories. Sally loved to be an integral part of any story that was unfolding around her. I served as director of chaplaincy service at Rose Medical Center, and I learned from her the meaning of standards. It was the first time I ever heard graphic standards, and then later on to say our standards are simply higher, something that she embedded not in just what she did at Rose, but wherever she was, that she had high standards for the way she lived her life. So Sally and I would often have interactions about patients, about the VIPs, community events, and the Pulse of Rose. As we became friendly, as everyone really became Sally's friend, unless you did something to annoy her, then you kind of better watch out and go the other way. Sally always loved to talk, and she liked to kibitz and schmooze. And one of her favorite topics, as you'll hear in some of the comments, was she liked to talk about good place to eat in Denver in those days, but it couldn't be American standard fare. And after a few years walking down the hallway, Sally nabbed me, or I really should say she cornered me. And there's this hallway at Rose that has pictures of all the men and women who founded Rose and important people in the community. And she looked at me and she said, "Rabbi, look at me. I'm not getting any younger. And one day I'm going to die. Just look at those pictures. They're all dead. And when I die, I want you to promise to conduct my funeral." And every few months until she retired, Sally would see me in the hallway and she would go, "Remember what I said, Rabbi?" And this went on for years. About 10 years ago, we connected at a Rose retirement party, and she came over to me, starting to shake her finger. And I said, "Sally, you're not dead yet. Let's go have a drink." She looped her arm around me, and off we went for l'chaim. And that's the way we should begin to hear the comments about Sally, that she loved to live life. She was not afraid of what was in front of her or behind her. In the real transcendental sense, she carpe diem every day. She chose to live life in so many ways. So Dylan, and then Bruce and Shelley, let's hear your wonderful tributes.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Dylan Steele. I'm one of Sally's 5 grandkids, and I just wanted to share a few words today on behalf of not just myself, but my sister Laura and our cousins Melanie Gaines, Jonathan Gaines, and Carly Gaines, who couldn't be here today, but I know they're watching us online. There's so many great stories about Sally. We heard a few already, and to us, she wasn't a journalist. She didn't work just at Rose Hospital. She wasn't just an actress or a fixture of the Jewish community. To us, she was simply Nana, a constant presence in our lives. And in many ways, she strengthened the bonds of our family, bringing us together from Atlanta, from San Francisco, from New York, even Montana, every year, just around this time, actually, to celebrate her birthday. And when we think about all the memories we have of Sally, and there are many, some of our favorite memories are 3 generations together, sharing stories, laughing at jokes, catching up with each other on each other's lives, and really waiting patiently for Sally as she asked the waiter to go over the menu and then go over the menu again and again, usually in painstaking detail. Sally really loved having her family together. She shared in the laughs. She dispensed advice, much of it to her grandchildren, much of which we ignored. She liked to stay up on our lives, where we were living, who we were dating. And when she was able, she'd even go down to spend several weeks in Atlanta each year with the Gaines family. She just did not want to miss a minute of all the action. And in her later years, she liked to just sit back and enjoy being at the table with the people who loved her most. We'll remember Sally as a Nana on the go. She brought us to plays and movies, to dinners and Bronco games. We shared Chinese food, talked about life outside Denver, and she took us to see the wild and the wonderful. I personally have a memory where she once brought me to the show Avenue Q, which was it was filled with inappropriate puppets singing songs like Everyone's a Little Bit Racist and The Internet is for Porn. And that was Sally. She wasn't a traditional grandmother. She didn't like to sit still. She had opinions. She enjoyed being out in the world, talking with people, having food, engaging with culture and art. And to me, this is really the legacy she leaves to her grandchildren. It wasn't her advice that often we didn't take. It was her desire to explore ideas, to see the world, to ask questions, to push when pushing is needed, and to keep the bonds of family alive. And for better or worse, there's a little bit of Sally and all of that and all of us, whether we want to admit it or not. So on behalf of all the grandchildren, I'll say, Sally, that you will be missed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Gaines. I'm Sally's son-in-law. And I want to give you a few snapshots of the larger picture that Sally was to me and to our family. She was a very special person to almost everybody that she met. She was a VIP, I think, to the people who were closest to her family, to the people who worked with her, and to her close friends. And she will never be easily forgotten, to say the least. If there was one word that really described Sally, I think it would be emphatic. Everything about her was emphatic. She loved to travel. She loved theater. She loved restaurants. And many of us can say that about ourselves. But with Sally, she read about these things. She thought about them. She talked about them. And she remembered them. Years later, she might remember what she saw in a museum, while the rest of us would have walked through a museum and within a few days forgotten what we had actually seen. But that was not her. She would, to put it in a more emphatic way, she relished these things. She really enjoyed life, and she really got the most out of it. And that was one of the things that I think all of us can admire most about her. The emphatic part of her not only took part in the things that she enjoyed, but in the person that she was. One might accurately describe her, and I think she would, in fact, like the thought that people might think of her as a bit of a tough cookie. But that was mostly, I think, to the people who knew her the best. To other people, she came across as very kind, very gentle, very friendly, very gregarious. To the rest of us, she might turn to us and say, "Knock it off." And that was a little bit her. But even with other people, she would speak very highly of them. Sometimes the people, the things, the events that she described were hardly recognizable if you experienced them yourself, because she spoke in such glorified terms. And I think that was because she understood the importance of a good name for herself. She decided to mask the bawdy part of herself and the boisterous part of herself. And I think also because she wanted people to think well of others. While she didn't suffer fools easily, she did want people to think highly of those other people out there who who might have been unfamiliar to the people that she was describing to. So I think she really understood the importance of a good name. Having talked about names, Rabbi, the importance of a good name. I think she really recognized that as something that was very, very important, and I think it's a good lesson for all of us to keep in mind. She was, as I think has already been mentioned, a kind of an outspoken person. There rarely were conversations that she didn't partake in, and she usually had some significant input. Many times she had advice. Her opinions sometimes were, in fact, emphatic, as I say. They were not always welcome, but the funny thing about them I learned over the years was that even though the advice might not be welcome, it was usually correct. And she left us with a great deal of wisdom, whether we wanted to hear it or not. So Sally may have passed away. We may bury her, but we will keep her in our spirit. Her spirit and her memory will keep those with us, and they will live on forever. Thank you.
Can you all hear me? Okay. Mom had a tough childhood. Her brother Gary died at home of pneumonia at an early age. Her father had a nervous breakdown as a result, and her mother was never the same after this happened. Despite all of this, Mom had the fortitude of spirit and will to rise above her circumstances and become the strong woman that everyone knew her to be. I'm reading a book now called The Priority List, a teacher's final quest to discover life's greatest lessons. And it has caused me to think about Mom's priority list and what she would have said her priorities were over the years. Here's what I believe are some of Mom's priorities that would have been included in this list. Priority number 1, her work at Rose Hospital. Mom was a pioneer and a trailblazer. She was a C-suite level executive and way ahead of her time. She joined Rose Hospital in 1967, starting out as a director of women's activities and later became the director of public relations. And closer to her retirement, she served as associate director of the Rose Foundation. She was affectionately called Mrs. Rose Hospital by all who knew her there, from the staff to the physicians to the entire Jewish community who supported the hospital. Mom helped the hospital grow financially and in national reputation by the amazing work that she did. One of the concepts that she created for the maternity and labor and delivery department was Rose Babies Experience. Tell me if I'm not saying it correctly, by the way. Okay, good. Mary White is keeping me honest. In fact, when I was in the hospital earlier this year, I felt a sense of pride seeing the words Rose Babies on the walls throughout the corridors. Also, an aspect of her work that thrilled her to no end was planning large-scale benefit fundraisers at Rose that included bringing in well-known Hollywood stars to speak at the event. She absolutely loved the buzz, the glamour, and making connections with the stars. In fact, she got to know and rub elbows with people like Sammy Davis Jr., Harry Belafonte, Ben Vereen, Steve Lawrence and Edie Gourmet, Debbie Reynolds, Shecky Green, Art Buchwald, and more. Mom would love to tell us stories about working with them and their many eccentricities. She was most animated recounting this aspect of her job. When I think of what Mom accomplished at that hospital and that she did it during times when women either didn't work or didn't have the opportunity to serve in a leadership capacity at their work, I'm amazed and have deep respect and admiration for her. Priority number 2, her love of performing on the stage. By day, Mom worked at Rose, but at night, she performed on stages throughout Denver. She began her show business career at the Green Spider Coffee House, where the stage was tiny and the audience sat very close to the actors. She did a show called Sarah and the Sax, which was a 2-person tragi-comedy that portrayed a dialogue between an older Jewish lady and a Black saxophone player on a park bench in New York City. Mom had a talent for accents and nailed the Jewish accent spot on. This show launched her acting career. She went on to become the lead singer in Carnival at the Third Eye, another Denver playhouse, and later was the musical lead in several shows at the famed Bonfils Theater, which is like the Alliance Theater in Atlanta, including shows like Guys and Dolls, Bits of Junk, Pal Joey, High Button Shoes, and Fiddler on the Roof. In that well-known musical, Mom played Golda, Tevye's wife. And in fact, she sang Sunrise Sunset at our wedding, and we played Sunrise Sunset to her as she lay dying, I guess. Craig and I spent many days and nights rehearsing Mom's lines with her. We were exposed to the theater in an early age, and it has stuck with us throughout our lifetimes. Seeing Mom on the stage was such a thrill and made us so proud. Can you imagine seeing your mother belting out a tune and dancing in front of throngs of people who cheered her after each performance? In fact, I recall people coming up to Mom while we were out to dinner and asking for her autograph. We were sort of like a Hollywood family for just that moment in time. Priority number 3, her friends and family. Since Mom was an only child, friendships were really important to her. She had an extremely active social life when married and then when widowed. She loved going out to dinner and to the theater with friends, schmoozing on the phone with them, and laughing with her gal pals. However, if you asked Mom what her biggest priority was, it would have been her family, whether it was her cousins in Denver or out west or her 2 children, Craig and me and our kids. While sometimes the way she expressed herself wasn't the most obvious, or sometimes she was downright difficult, I know that deep down she felt the most over her family. Craig and I took great care of Mom over the years and included her with us throughout her lifetime. Mom traveled with us to places like California, Las Vegas, North Carolina, Florida, New York City, and the mountains of Colorado. She loved coming to Atlanta and meeting all of our friends who welcomed her with open arms. Mom attended many of our family's life events, from bar and bat mitzvahs to high school graduations, basketball and soccer games, and Passover seders and Rosh Hashanah open houses. While Mom wasn't a grandma who knitted Afghans or made matzo ball soup, she did always provide lively dialogues and had a big presence in the Steele and Gaines lives. Mom wasn't one to hold back with advice. You all have heard that as a common theme, and told it like it was, despite our not always wanting to hear what she had to say. She was very direct, and cursing like a sailor was definitely okay with Mom. I recall once when we were driving somewhere with my kids, Mom used the word damn in a sentence. One of my kids exclaimed, "Nana just said a bad word," to which my mother replied, "Oh, Shelley, your kids need to grow up and join the real world. I'll use words like damn whenever I damn well please to do so." That was my mom. We have many funny stories about my mom that often made us belly laugh, sometimes because she herself was funny, and other times because things that she did or said were so outlandish that we couldn't help laughing. We recalled times on leaving a restaurant, she would say, "Wait a minute," and stopped us. She would have us take her over to the bowl of mints. She would grab a handful of mints and dump them into her purse. Sometimes we had to stop her from doing this a second time. We were highly embarrassed, but she didn't care. We also took her to many movies over the years. When she needed hearing impaired headsets, we would get them for her, only to have them not work once the show started. She would say in a very loud voice, "I can't hear a thing. What's going on with these damn headsets?" And everyone would shush us. Of course, Mom didn't care, and one of us would run up to get a replacement. Sorry about my voice. I don't think that we ever saw a complete show between the broken headsets, closed captioning monitors, or spilled popcorn that covered the aisles and seats. We just wanted Mom not only to be happy, but to quiet down. It was always funny in hindsight, but very challenging in the moment. I could keep you here for hours telling Sally's stories, some heartwarming and others just crazy and absurd. She was a woman who really made an impact on so many people. She had vitality and an enthusiasm for living. She really did love life. She liked crunchy foods, lots of nuts added to everything, and eating leftovers gave her a thrill hard to imagine. People were attracted to Sally and her charismatic nature. Many of you also know that Mom had amazing caregivers who tended to her like she was their own mother. Alberta, Debbie, Esther, Angie, Miss Lee, and Brianne treated her with dignity and respect. They laughed with her and comforted her over the years. Without them, Mom's quality of life would have been diminished. They went with her everywhere and would often comment about how much they all loved their Sally. It's hard to believe that she's gone. I'm so glad that Craig and Nancy and Bruce and I were there during her final days, and that Craig, Bruce, and I were there when she passed. I am sure that this gave her great comfort and solace in her final moments. Mom used to remind us tempus fugit and carpe diem. Time flies, and to seize the day whenever we said goodbye to her. These are words that we will not only remember, but plan to live by as we continue her legacy and our own personal journeys. Thank you. Love you, Mom.
Shelley asked me before we started, would you guys steal my thunder? And then you more than stole my thunder because you fulfilled the fifth commandment of Kabeda Devilcha Vetimecha, to give honor to father and mother. And so the words that you spoke really give honor. But you know what it means when a clergy person takes off his or her watch and puts it on top of the lectern? It means absolutely nothing. So before I continue, I would be remiss if I didn't do this first. I had to remember to do this. I needed some kind of different kind of glasses because Sally always had glasses that were Sally. They just are. So those are for you, Sally. As I said a few moments ago, one of my last commitments that I made in my days at Rose was to officiate at this funeral. So let me fulfill this with some more of the formal and turn this in some different kinds of directions from my lens. So who is Sally Price Steele Metzger? Some of her biographical daughter of Morris and Florence, born here in Denver, December 29th. So we just celebrated her birthday in 1929. If you do the math, a full 92 years of life, and what a life. Denver and Atlanta in some ways was always home for Sally. She was deeply integrated into the community. And as you said earlier, Sally's life was deeply changed forever with the death of her brother, Gary. Sally would have easily qualified for what we call the pioneer license plates. Some people have no idea how you get them, but you have to be born here and live here and function in the community, get it. That Department of Motor Vehicle provides to those who live here in Colorado. This was her home, and she had a passion to make Denver and the greater community a better place to be for herself and everyone else. She, like so many other Denver residents, I could be reading this eulogy for other people, attended Colfax Elementary, Lake Junior High, and then graduated from North in 1947, long time ago, and spent 3.5 years at the University of Denver. Didn't graduate, but she had a lot of learning. She married Harris Steele in 1951, and together, the two of you, Shelley and Craig, were a wonderful part of that marriage. In August 1977, she married Jerome Jerry Steele, and together, and they were married until his death in 1995. So another wonderful adventure in her life. Sally had a real zeal, a zest for life, and she loved the stage. And the world was her stage. There wasn't a part of it she didn't love. As you said, the early years at the Green Spider Coffee House and several other playhouses and Boniface and roles in the Pajama Game, Guys and Dolls, Pal Joey, Fiddler on the Roof, and some of these pictures are popping up on the screen around us. Sally was known to sing at many weddings and bar bat mitzvahs, and she also helped produce plays at one time when synagogues used to do, the men's club and sister would get together and they do a production. It was a wonderful thing to do in the community, and she was always involved with that. As you said, one of the great things she loved to do with the big productions at Rose when they brought in the stars, like Sammy Davis Jr. She loved to be seen, and I said, to be seen, and those glasses always stood out. She had a knack for writing, which I think flowed into the next generation. You said this next generation loved to write. She wrote for the Intermountain Jewish News as a society and the feature editor from 1948 to 1951. And all these roles, I think, helped her find her second home for 25 years at Rose Medical Center. I need not tell many of you assembled here or joining us via Zoom about the old Rose, Rose before it was sold, before the Community Foundation came to be and went to the next step of Rose Medical Center. Rose was the central hub for many Jewish physicians and a designated East Side hospital for members of the Jewish community. It was the premier place for medical care, offering cutting-edge medical science in many ways that other hospitals were not yet offering. It was also the hub for all kinds of networking, the who's who of Denver. If you were connected to Rose, you were connected to everyone in Denver's Jewish community, the business community, the Denver political community, the Colorado community. The business deals and commercial transactions and social events and significant communal events were often found at 4567 East 9th Avenue. The hallways and meeting rooms at Rose are embedded with the history of our Denver community. It's what really given strength to these wonderful community we now live in. As we heard, Sally had a lot of different titles: Director of Women's Activities, Directors of the Community Relations, Directors of Marketing, Associate Director for the Early Rose Foundation. At Rose, she was often the hub of the wheel with many spokes coming out from her. She was nonstop, the ever-ready bunny. Her partnerships, though, I think with Joel Edelman and Jeff Dorsey, the CEOs at the time, often made me smile as a young rabbi trying to understand dynamics and power play in different kinds of ways. Those on the outside could not understand the dynamics because at times Sally was really very complex, and she challenged the way the system operated. She challenged the system in a male-dominated medical world, and there was Sally. And those of you who know her agree her that she was strong-willed, she was opinionated, she was vociferous, she was creative, she was insightful, and she was really smart. She was really a mentor. And that mentorship, I think, is reflected by some of the people in this room and some who not. There's Bev Usted and Maureen Tarrant and Peggy Randall, who all were in the PR and communications department. And your presence here speaks to that love and friendship of a woman cutting the way for you in so many ways. And then there was Mary White and Barbara Brannon serving in senior leadership roles at the hospital, again, ahead of the time, along with Sally. Women were not serving these roles. Things that we take for granted today was what Sally laid the path for. She was wise, and she mentored these women so doors could be opened for our daughters and our granddaughters and the next generation. She understood what it meant to accept people no matter where they were. If the surgeons would let Sally scrub in, I'm certain she would be next to them, guiding them on how to best do the procedure by following the rules and the regulations. I think many of the surgeons were glad that there was one place where Sally would not go. Along with her time, Sally was involved in many community organizations, and this was so true. She was involved in National Council of Jewish Women, American Jewish Committee, Jewish Family Service, and of course, the Food Bank of the Rockies, just to list a few. As you heard, Sally really loved being a mom. I think that was the top. She loved being a mom, and you were honest with me. She could cook, but she didn't love cooking. Her favorite thing to do was, I think, assemble menus from good places to eat and often to have the leftover meals. In speaking, Shelley and Craig, with you guys, you shared many stories about mom, but what I really heard was that there was a great respect for other people and how to live life. You often can tell who people are by who they hang out with. We're always concerned about who our kids hang out with or who influences us. And you shared with me that you grew up spending a lot of time in one of the great rabbinic leaders of our community, Rabbi Dan and Ida Goldberger of blessed memory. There was a picture of them. And the Goldbergers, as those who are longtime Deverites know, were really the definition of mensch or mention. They were people who knew what it meant to be kind and welcoming and live a good life and set the table and talk what it means to be involved in the community as well as the Jewish community. And if the two of you were exposed to this, I'm certain it's filled into the next generation in your marriages and with your children and the great-grandchild who is now here. You said mom also loved to tell jokes. And I heard some of those jokes, which I could not repeat. She would say, Rabbi, I shouldn't say this, but, and then she would tell me a wonderful off-color story. And I'd say, that's very funny, Sally, but okay. As you know, that Atlanta was really her second home. Sally could collect all kinds of things, but she collected your friends. She met people wherever. And if it was at the Passover Seder table, if it was frequent visits to going different places, family was what was all about. And so when you think about all the things that you guys said about your mother and mother-in-law and grandmother and great-grandmother, this was a woman who loved to hang out. And so this next generation has stories to tell. And the stories to tell are about a woman who knew what it means to be a role model, to blaze certain paths for the future. In our tradition on Shabbat, we read the words of Eshet Chayal, a woman of valor. And the words of woman of valor, I think, are somewhat dated. We need to think about a woman as an Eshet Chayal, a woman warrior. And a warrior is not necessarily someone who goes to war, but someone who does protecting. She protected her strong beliefs because they were guided and grounded in strong values. She was strong in her faith because she understood that human beings and work with others makes a difference. And she always was open to new and creative ideas, even if she didn't agree with you at first. She at some point would come along the way and say, there is some merit in that. Let me think about it. So as we say shalom to her, we understand that her life was full. And as you mentioned, the caregivers who are with us, we want to say thank you because you helped live with her and she was blessed to have you in that life. And that is so important in our tradition. And so I choose the words from Alvin Fine, and he says these words: it is a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and to lose. A holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing to love, what death has touched. When one lives a long life, we have a reading that we often do during Yisker in our congregations. It's called Birth is a Beginning. Birth is a beginning and death is a destination.
Any parting advice?
Advice:
Yeah.
do everything you can to travel as much as you want and accomplish everything you can accomplish at a young age, because it gets tougher as you get older.
That's okay. You jumped the gun, my friend, but that's okay. Birth is a beginning and death a destination, and life is a journey. From child to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength to weakness, and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding. From defeat to defeat, until looking backward ahead, we see that victory lies then at some high place along the way, when having made the journey stage by stage. Birth is a beginning and death is a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. And there's this wonderful short video we're going to watch for a moment before we have our concluding prayers. We will start it from the top, because anything less than that would not meet Sally's standards.
Any parting advice?
Advice:
Yeah.
do everything you can to travel as much as you want and accomplish everything you can accomplish at a young age, because it gets tougher as you get older. Physically, and you lose people who are near and dear to you that would go with you places. And I regret I didn't do some additional traveling. But I always tell everybody, even though it's tough, you usually young age can't afford to do much. Whatever you can do, do it. Because when you're spry and younger and you can see well and hear well and get around, you'll always have those memories. The other parting advice is stay very close to your family, because when push comes to shove, they love you. They love you no matter whether you're good or bad. Naturally, they don't love you if you do horrible things, but they forgive you for a lot. And they, unlike friends who come and go, family is what really counts. So be close with your brothers and sisters, and of course with your mates and your children and grandchildren. But be very close, because you really need them in your life. And I'm grateful for what I have.
If there's nothing else, we'll turn it off and maybe do one more session before we leave. I'll talk to Mom.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Is there anything I didn't cover that you wanted to know about? I'm not going to give you all the secrets.
I don't think so. Okay, say bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Shelley and Bruce and Craig and Nancy and Carly, Matt, Jonathan, Melanie, Michelle, Greg Kerwin, and Eleanor and Dylan and Camden. We just we extend our deepest condolences. This was a good life, and that was a wonderful tribute to her. I'm going to ask, in a moment to rise for the memorial prayer. After that prayer, then you'll get directions from the staff here at Feldman's. We're always thankful for their help in going out for the interment. We ask that all of you be safe in the next couple of days and think about the difference we can make in those lives that have been impacted this past 24 hours. Please rise if you're able. El Malay Rachamim, Shochem Benomim, Ametzei Menucha Nichuna, Tachar Knefecha Shchinam, Im Kiroshim, Utorim, Kizar Hakir Mazirim, and Nishmat, Spritza Rezel Bat, Moshe Befego, Shalchal Alama, Ba'al Harachamim, Yeset Besetamim, Vayitzra Bitzro, Yechaim, Nishmata, Anaychun Alachta, Vitanuach, Mishalom, Amiskava, Venomar, Amen. O God, full of compassion, eternal spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest under the wings of your presence. So Sally has entered eternity. Master mercy, let you find refuge forever in the shadows of your wings. Let this woman who had a zest for life always be bound up in the bond of eternal life. The eternal God is her inheritance. May she rest in shalom. May she rest in peace. There are stars whose light reaches the earth only after they themselves have disintegrated. And there are men and women whose scintillating memory lights the world after they have passed from it. These lights which shine in the darkest night are those which illumine for us the path. Sally, you will illumine for us many paths along our way. Shalom, and thank you for being with us. This concludes our service here at Feldman's.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the rabbi mentioned, that does conclude our service. The interment will be private, so we'll be taking the family very shortly out to their cars and getting off to the cemetery. We do have a few minutes. Those who have been asked to be pallbearers, we'll ask you to start gathering right in the back of the chapel, and we'll bring the casket to you in just a few minutes. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Mr. Cohen. How are you, Jim?
I'm not gonna take it apart. I'm gonna get sent it home with you guys. You guys can take it apart. Okay. We should all go. Let's go to the cemetery. Let's get to the cemetery because it's.